Let's bring in Ben Shapiro, editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire, syndicated columnist, host of the Ben Shapiro Show. Ben, are you shocked we got to this point?
Not at all. I mean, I think that this has been going on for at least a couple of years here. It started on college campuses, obviously. We've seen it at rallies during the last election cycle. Remember, there was a rally for President Trump in Chicago that was shut down due to tactics like this. I don't find any of this particularly shocking. I guess I'm just shocked by how much of the mainstream left has decided to endorse it. I mean, there have been Democratic leaders who have said that these sort of tactics are unacceptable, but I'm not sure they're not being outflanked by their radical base at this point.
Has this ever happened to you? What happened to all of these individuals? Or Pam Bondi? My gosh, they got up in her face. I know that there have been protesters when you speak at schools, but has anything like that happened when you're out at a restaurant or a movie theater?
No, thank God. This is one of the benefits of keeping kosher. When I go to kosher restaurants, I'm generally pretty popular. So,
what about this? You know, there are a number of major newspapers today, the New York Daily News, the L.A. Times. They're talking about how this could backfire. L.A. Times writes, resist too far. Pelosi tries to tamp down progressives' public shaming of Trump officials. And she's not the only one. Chuck Schumer essentially came out and said, hey, stop.
Yeah, and the problem, though, is that you have people like Simone Sanders on CNN yesterday saying that it is a part of white privilege to call for civility, and she's not the only one saying that. You saw John Legend yesterday do the same thing on Twitter, where he suggested that calling people out in public places, destroying their ability to have dinner, standing outside their home, and this is all stuff that should happen if you disagree with the policy enough. And this is why I say I think that, you know, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer may be representing something good on this particular issue, but their base is not particularly interested in what they have to say, or at least large segments of the base.
Hey, Ben, you know what my worry is? My worry is the natural response is to do the same thing back to the other side. And then Republican activists are going to be disturbing other people in other restaurants and at movie theaters and at the park. And then the families are more than likely involved because that's what they do. They find out where you live. I don't want Republicans to mimic this. I mean, isolate these incidents and stop them. I think it's got to be a huge national awareness, not a response.
I totally agree with that. And I think this is one of the big problems that we have in our politics right now is everybody assumes that they're being victimized and therefore their reaction is okay. So I wouldn't be surprised if some folks on the right see this as permission to go do this to folks on the left. I think that a lot of folks on the left see this whole tactic as a response to President Trump being rude at rallies and such. And the problem is, once you see yourself as a victim, I mean, psychological studies are pretty clear on this. Once you see yourself as a victim, you're far more likely to see yourself as someone who's capable of victimizing others. It's okay to victimize others because you're just responding. But once you feel like you're responding, it gives you a lot more moral credence to go out and do something bad to somebody else. I think that's what the left is feeling today.
You talked a little bit about Hollywood. The Hollywood director and the producer, Judd Apatow, he tweeted this out. He's talking about the president. He says he's a Nazi. He wants no judicial process. He kidnapped children and commits acts of violence for political gain and to support his racist views. He admires violent dictators. Trump is a Nazi. The debate is over. Soon we will have proof he is a Nazi supported by the Russians. Your reaction?
I mean, delusional nonsense. Read a damn book. But unfortunately, in Los Angeles, this has sort of become the way people think, because it's a water cooler town and everybody thinks the same way. You can say crazy things like Trump is a Nazi and get away with it. If Trump were a Nazi, does Judd Apatow really think that he'd be able to go on Twitter and say stuff like this? The Nazis were not famous for their tolerance of dissent, particularly in this sort of manner.
All right, let's shift gears. Let's take, in this next soundbite, listen up, Ben. Here is former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. Once again, she is comparing the current president to the guy in Turkey who just won another term. Watch.
Populists can stay in power by mobilizing a fervent base. Louise mentioned my personal experience with winning 3 million more votes, but still losing. And we will leave discussions of the American Electoral College for another day. Monk concludes by saying, Turkey also shows that political and intellectual elites, both inside the country and around the world, persistently underestimate the threat which these kinds of leaders pose to the survival of democratic institutions.
So, Ben, she would be president of the United States today if it wasn't for that pesky Electoral College.
Yeah, well, I like that she only is angry at the Electoral College now, right? After you lose, it's a convenient time to get angry at the Electoral College. My favorite part of that, though, is where she's suddenly comparing Trump to Erdogan. Well, she was Secretary of State, and when she was Secretary of State, she was actually pretty warm with Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who's a dictator over in Turkey. In March 2009, she actually was talking about Turkey, and somebody asked her about human rights violations and the attempt to quash dissidents, and she suggested that Erdogan was partially justified because who likes being criticized by the press? So just like typical Hillary Clinton, when she was in office, she was very friendly toward all of the world's worst dictators. As soon as she leaves, suddenly President Trump is just like those dictators who she was massaging until 5 seconds ago.
And Ben, the also thing about Erdogan, he jailed his opponent. The opponent had to campaign from prison. Does President Trump say that did he win because now Hillary Clinton was locked up?
No, he said lock her up, but she wasn't actually, it turns out. So.
Good point. All right. Ben, thank you very much for joining us today. Check out his wildly successful Ben Shapiro podcast.
Thank you, Ben.